Yes, sir.
Hello. Chitali, all yours. We can start.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Chitali Kohli, Research Associate at JAS Pragna Internship Program. It's my pleasure to welcome you all.
Chitali, we can't hear you. You have to adjust your mic.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Is it clear, sir?
Yeah.
Yeah, better.
Okay, okay, sir. Okay. I'll start again, sir. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Chitali Kohli, Research Associate of JAS Pragna Internship Program. It's my pleasure to welcome you all. Today's program will be presented by Mr. Aman Sharma. He has completed this internship and will present his paper titled Soldiers for Hire, Private Military Contractors and Legal Conundrums. The program will commence with an opening address by Dr. R. Srinivasan, followed by the presentation by Aman for about 20 minutes. The presentation will be followed by question and answer session in which you can interact with the presenter. After the Q&A session, Commander J.K. Nair, Founder Director of Defense Research and Studies, share a small overview about the DRAS Pragna program. Thereafter, Commodore Deshmukh will share mentor's perspective. We will then end the program with a short thank you note. I request all of you to keep your mics muted except when you require to speak. We hope this presentation will be of immense interest to all the speakers. Thank you. I now request Dr. R. Srinivasan to commence the program with his opening address. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Chitali. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. We are, of course, having our Aman Sharma presenting his papers on soldiers for hire and the legal conundrums surrounding that issue. Just to give you a little perspective about the topic, on the 24th of June, 1869, a battle was taking place in a place called Solferino in Europe between Napoleon's armies and the Austro-Hungarian Empire. A very rich and influential Swiss merchant by name Henry Dunant happened to be passing through Solferino, and he witnessed that battle firsthand. In that battle, what he saw was not just the clash of two professional armies. He also saw how the civilian population in the town was entirely destroyed, how the infrastructure in that town was destroyed, and what kind of suffering that everybody faced because of that war. Now, Henry Dunant was moved by what he saw, and whatever he did in the next 90 years or so resulted in what we today call as the Geneva Convention 1949. We are all aware that the Geneva Convention 1949 covers the entire gamut of war, okay, where armies, professional standing armies of nations are involved in conflict. These Geneva laws, we call them law, Convention 1, Convention 2, Convention 3, and their protocols, we call them Geneva law. Geneva law prescribes the conduct that the professional armies must indulge when they are warring with each other. It prescribes the way unarmed combatants, people who are not involved in the conflict, must be treated. And it also prescribes what is considered as war crime or even genocide. Whenever populations which are not involved in war are affected by the actions of militaries, I'm talking about standing professional militaries, then in nutshell, the Geneva Convention says the actions of the military and the military commanders and even people who are responsible for employing those militaries, they must be held accountable for those violations. That is in a nutshell about Geneva Convention, and this obviously is about professional armies. But today's topic is on military contractors. We are aware that from the Iraq war, so-called Desert Storm and the Desert Shield, we have seen an increasing number of private military contractors and their personnel taking part in all facets of operations, all facets of conflicts, which earlier only professional armies were doing by themselves. Today, private military contractors they are fighting, they are providing logistic support, they gather intelligence, they undertake rescue missions, they do all kinds of other operations which are required in support of the so-called professional armies which are employing them. In 2008, when the Iraqi invasion took place, we find that the ratio of the military contractors to combat personnel was 1:1. That is, if 1,000 professional soldiers were deployed in Iraq, there were 1,000 private military contractors. Today, the ratio has grown many-fold. In 2020, in the same Middle East, there are only 35,000 United States armed forces personnel deployed, but there are 53,000 private military contractors. The ratio is almost 1.5. And just to give an example from the United States military budget itself, in 2020, the United States military budget was about, say, 700 billion US dollars, out of which 370 billion US dollars were spent on private military contractors. But America is not alone. There are at least 15 very well-known military contractors in the world. They come from all countries. We are all familiar with Wagner of Russia. We are all familiar with other groups which are operating in Africa, in Europe, elsewhere, wherever conflicts are taking place in the world, including South America. Now, the question before us is that the actions of these military contractors, do they result in some accountability wherever violations take place? So long as if private military contractors are only providing support roles, so long as they are not endangering the human rights and right to life of innocent populations, non-combatant populations, then we should not be worried at all. Let the private military contractors flourish, we should say that way, because it is a private military contractor. He is making business, he is making money. But we are all aware that whether it is the case of Blackwater in Iraq, whether it is a case of Wagner in Africa, whether it is a case of other corporations which have got involved in such kind of conflicts elsewhere in the world, they have killed with impunity. They have affected the civilian populations with impunity, and the beauty is they have got away with it. Till date, we have no recorded case which proves that private military contractors' actions have been held accountable to them, that they have been brought to justice, if I may use the word. Okay, like we even know presidents of countries like Pinochet, okay, in Argentina, he was Chile, sorry, Pinochet was held responsible for his actions because the Geneva law and the corroborating ICC guidelines, they lay down that even heads of state are not having any immunity if their actions result in gross violations of human rights or endangering the life and properties of populations in a conflict zone. We are all familiar with Akeyasu case also in Africa, where again, as a head of state, he was held responsible and he was punished by ICC for his actions in all the racial conflicts that took place in Africa. Okay. So, coming back to the question of private military contractors, and seeing that private military contractors are now becoming an indispensable tool in the hands of governments and private corporations in furthering their national interest or commercial interest, whichever may be the interest, that they are becoming indispensable in today's conflict-ridden scenarios, it is necessary for us to contemplate whether we should have some accountability apportioned to them. Should we bring them, shall I say a loose statement, should we bring them to justice if they violate human rights or right to life? It's $1 million question, and we are not the only ones who are debating this. The scholarly community across the world is debating, but I'm happy to say that in India, probably we are the trendsetters. Take a Dras Pragna program started with this particular topic. Okay, and we are very happy that Aman has undertaken some intensive research and he has put forward his well-researched thoughts in the form of a paper which he will be presenting. And I am very sure that his presentation will not only educate us, but it will also help us to formulate our own thoughts about further research in that dimension. And Henry Dunant took 90 years to bring, the professional armies to some accountability in the form of Geneva Conventions. We do not know whether we will be able to achieve it in that kind of a time frame. We are too small a fry, but we are happy to promote such a thought process. So saying, I wish Aman Sharma all the very best in his presentation. And ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us. Please reserve your comments till he finishes. Then let's have a good discussion on the topic that he is going to be debating about. Thank you very much. Thank you, Chitali.
Thank you, sir, for enlightening us. Moving forward with the program, I will give a brief introduction about Mr. Aman Sharma. Aman is currently pursuing his master's from Indira Gandhi National Open University. He has interned with our program for the past 4 months. He will now present his paper titled Soldiers for Hire, Private Military Contractors and Legal Conundrums. Aman, the stage is all yours.
Thank you, Chitali. Am I audible, sir?
Loud and clear.
So let me start my presentation. So, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Aman Sharma. My topic for today is Soldiers for Hire, Private Military Contractors and Legal Conundrums. So, non-conventional soldiers in the form of mercenaries have been hired to supplement the military's capacity since the beginning of the concept of war. As the time progressed, the role of mercenaries also evolved, and during the 19th and the 20th century, the role of centuries, the need for regulations around their use also started to gain momentum. Against this backdrop, the definition of mercenaries came into being. The definition of mercenary is primarily guided by Article 47.1 of Geneva Conventions Protocol 1977 and later supplemented by the International Convention against the recruitment, use, financing and training of mercenaries 1989 that came into force in 2001. Then an important event that had a major impact on this phenomena of mercenarism was the Cold War. After the Cold War subsided, military spending started to decline around the globe, which also meant a decline in the workforce. Now, this highly skilled workforce was available to be employed in military-related activities and support services outside the ambit of state, and was subsequently utilized by the private sector. Uh, Another consequence of the Cold War and the rivalry among countries was the proliferation of several conflicts that were both direct and indirect or proxy in nature. These conflicts required a consistent supply of both men and material as well. This created a demand for military service, and the readily available skilled workforce filled this gap. This led to the corporatization of traditional mercenaries and hence emerged the private military and security companies, which are also known as PMSCs. These companies provided and continue to provide a wide array of services ranging from combat operations, strategic planning, intelligence collection and analysis, operational and logistical support, training, procurement, and maintenance as well. So, in a nutshell, private military contractors are private business entities that provide military or security services irrespective of how they describe themselves. It may be consultants, it may be advisors, it may be trainers, but that's the basic definition of PMSCs. So there is a perception, although it is debatable, that PMSCs provide a cost-effective solution to carrying out military support services. This nature of PMSCs provides a good alternative to states' weakened capacity and resources. However, this does not imply that hiring a PMSC is a long-term solution for the security gap that they are attempting to fill. PMSCs often operate in an environment with a significant security vacuum, and their ability to monopolize this vacuum is detrimental to the state's authority in the long term. Now, they're able to do so because of the existence of several gray areas and legal gaps in PMSC regulations and the inability to apply the existing norms in a conflict zone. These legal ambiguities are often exploited by the vested interests of a state, company, or even an individual. My objective in this talk is to elaborate on some of these legal ambiguities and gaps and the reason behind them. It is also important to determine the authorities to which the PMSCs are accountable. These authorities may be the home state of the PMSC, the authorities in their area of operation, the United Nations, or some other international organization that has an overseeing feature. I have tried to contextualize these points using 3 case studies on some prominent cases that have been reported over time since the last 2 or 3 decades. All the PMSs mentioned in the case studies have been embroiled in severe cases of human rights abuse and illegitimate conduct in their area of operation. The methodology that I have used is to analyze the existing regulations and use primary as well as secondary sources to identify legal gaps that impede the process of ensuring accountability for the PMSCs. So I have used 3 case studies in my analysis: Blackwater, Wagner Group, DynCorp International. First, let us take the case of Blackwater. The US government, particularly the executive branch, perceived that instead of mobilizing troops at home, it would be better to outsource their passive duties in Iraq to contractors. This involved securing logistic routes, personal protection, military-based security, etc. But an unintended consequence that arose was that the objectives of these contractors were more direct and smaller in scope than those of their conventional military counterparts. This dissociated them from the local population, and the locals started viewing the contractors as well as military personnel with suspicion. The contractors were often seen as aggressively pursuing their objectives and being inconsiderate to the needs of the locals. During one such convoy escort duty, Blackwater employees indiscriminately shot at vehicles on the convoy route, perceiving them to be hostile, killing 17 and injuring several others in the infamous Nisour Square massacre. Since no Iraqi authority had jurisdiction over them, initially it became very difficult to conduct investigations and subsequently prosecute them. Eventually, MEJA, that is the Military Extraterritorial Jurisdictions Act, and the Alien Torts Claim Act were used to prosecute the contractors. So, the image on the left shows Blackwater contractors escorting a US government official in Iraq in 2004. And the image on the right is of Nisour Square, where the shooting took place. Now, the second case is the Wagner Group. The Wagner Group is closer to the classic definition of mercenaries. They have been accused of having ties with the Russian state and carrying out activities at the behest of the Russian government. Mercenaries and their related activities are banned in Russia. So any official affiliation is always denied. But there is sufficient evidence that Wagner's activities are aligned with Russian government's objectives. Wagner contracts with their host governments are secretive, but it is evident that they get payments in terms of concessions for mining, access to strategic locations, etc. This practice is widely prevalent in Africa, where mining companies associated with Yevgeny Prigozhin operate. Prigozhin, who is also a confidant of Putin, is also the supposed head of the Wagner Group. Since there is an absence of an official structure, it is challenging to hold someone responsible for the actions of Wagner. This is exploited by Russia to expand its influence in a region of interest as well as carry out subversive activities while evading responsibility. So the image on the left was published by Security Service of Ukraine, the Ukrainian intelligence agency, and they claimed it to be of fighters of Wagner Group, somewhere operational in Syria or Africa. Then the image on the right is a screen grab from a video leaked on Telegram that shows Yevgeny Prigozhin inside a Russian prison, and he's hiring convicts to participate in the Ukraine war, in the recent Ukraine war. Now the third case study is of DINCORP. It was one of the biggest corporations involved in the security sector and has now been taken over by another firm named Amentum. It grabbed huge government contracts and was operational all across the Middle East, Africa, South America, and Eastern Europe. One of its most controversial deployments was in Bosnia, where they were under contract with the UN to train law enforcement officials after the Bosnian War. The employees of DINCORP, in collusion with UN employees in Bosnia, were involved in human trafficking and sexual abuse cases. The government there was unable to prosecute the employees, and the UN refused to waive their diplomatic immunity. As a result, the employees were only repatriated and terminated from service. No criminal prosecution could be pursued against them. So, apart from the Geneva Conventions and other related frameworks, two complementary major international initiatives are the Montreux Document and International Code of Conduct. Both of these aimed at guiding the conduct of private military contractors. The main objective of the Montreux Document is to encourage states to conduct effective due diligence while contracting PMSCs and further encourage PMSC to conduct proper vetting of the individual contractor. Then it is also important, it also contains a compilation of relevant international legal obligations and good practices to be followed by all the stakeholders involved in the industry. The Montreux Document, conceptualized by the International Committee of the Red Cross, and the Swiss government, outlines and addresses the practical aspects associated with contracting PMSCs. These practices can be implemented during an armed conflict, a post-conflict scenario, or during peacetime as well. The International Code of Conduct Association, an association of PMSCs, established a code of conduct to ensure that signatories respect international humanitarian law. Its aim is to translate the existing rules into principles for the PMSCs to implement during their operations. It outlines rules and principles regarding human rights, use of force, detention, and prohibition of torture and human trafficking. It also prescribes policies for the management, such as vetting, training, weapons handling, and grievance procedures. The ICOC further requires the PMSCs to comply with these corporate good practices in their contract for personnel, subcontractors, and clients. The Montreux Document and the ICOC both share the principal objective of enhancing PMSC compliance with applicable rules of international humanitarian law. Their recommendations, among other things, also include a collaborative approach between the national judicial system and the non-judicial measures such as grievance redressal mechanisms for victims, compensation, etc., to ensure better accountability. Despite such initiatives at different levels, many legal gaps still exist. So, for example, the definition of the term mercenary given by Article 47 of Additional Protocol 1 is restrictive in nature. What this means is the conditions that are prescribed in the conventions are rigid and do not account for the geopolitical complexity of modern times. For instance, no one who is a national of any of the parties to the conflict can be a mercenary, but PMSCs may or may not recruit an employee from the party country for a job in a conflict zone. So also a person must be employed with the aim of being directly involved in combat and motivated by the desire for private gain. But PMSC contractors are often deployed for support roles such as perimeter security, training, etc. So as long as they are doing that, they don't fall into the category of a mercenary. So there are divergences that disallow PMSCs to be classified as mercenary. Not all PMSCs, but there are significant numbers. So there is a divergence of approach between the UN, states, and industry. While the UN advocates for stricter regulations, industry as well as the home state of those PMSCs advocate for a self-regulatory approach. For instance, a state that has ratified either or both of the UN and African conventions against mercenarism has an obligation to prosecute and punish mercenaries. But many countries that employ or are home to many prominent PMSCs have not yet ratified such a convention. Most initiatives and agreements are non-binding in nature. Hence, there is a lack of definitive measures against the offenders. There is also hesitancy on the part of government to balance their national interests with social responsibility. Now, this coupled with other factors mentioned above leads to a divergence between national and international frameworks and makes it difficult to build consensus. So, the inability to effectively prosecute the offenders incentivizes them to commit further crimes. In the case of DIMCORP, even after incidents of abuse came to light, it was reported that the practice of trafficking continued in Bosnia and surrounding conflict zones as well. The corruption in the host country's governments, as well as its weak institutions and authorities, proved to be an asset for PMSCs to exploit. Also, if the national security objective of the home as well as the host state are fulfilled, they might try to overlook cases of abuse as well as corruption. There have been several attempts to address these gaps and put in place a more comprehensive framework by national governments, civil society, and industry themselves. The most prominent and latest examples being the Montreux document and ICOC that were already mentioned. But more needs to be done to enforce the prescribed good practices. It is critical for all stakeholders to identify good practices and conduct while also developing a comprehensive framework for PMSCs. These frameworks then need to be reflected in national and international legislations. The focus should be on addressing the lack of penal actions and enforce remedies for victims. It is also important to move beyond the scope of direct or indirect combat and involve dimensions like human rights abuse, illicit arms trade, and direct but covert links to the state to define PMSCs. Promotion of better training procedures, effective and detailed vetting of recruits, and registration of both employees and firms are important to identify the home states of PMSCs. Despite several efforts, the complexity surrounding the PMSC industry makes it difficult to fix accountability. New consumers are appearing everywhere, seeking security in an insecure world. States like Nigeria defending their territory against terrorists, states like Russia invading its neighbors and expanding their areas of influence, oil and mining companies guarding their assets, shipping lines defending their vessels against pirates, humanitarian organizations protecting their workers in a dangerous location, oligarchs who want professional muscle, all turn to the service of traditional mercenaries or their corporate twin, the PMSC. With an ever increasing demand for security, it may be assumed that PMSCs are here to stay. So it becomes imperative for the international community to recognize the gaps and problems that have led to cases of human rights abuse and define the rights and responsibilities of all the stakeholders involved. Hence, being for or against the so-called soldiers for hire is a separate debate, but it is important to force them to be visible to ensure accountability. And that brings us to the end of my presentation. Thank you so much for your interest and attention.
Thank you, Amit. Thank you, Aman, for the wonderful presentation. Ladies and gentlemen, the topic is now open for questions and answers. If you wish, you can post your questions in the chat box. Please ensure to keep your questions or comments brief. So please, you can ask your questions.
Chitali, I
Anyone?
have no comments for, I have no questions for Aman, but I have a small comment to make.
Sure.
The study done by Brown University in USA indicates that by the year 2030, 2030, the turnover for private military security companies across the world is likely to more than double. It is around 224 billion US dollars today in 2020, and it is expected to reach 457 billion US dollars by 2030, that is in next 8 years. This emphasizes the point that Aman was making, that PMCs are here to stay. Now, if they are here to stay, then it is definitely needed that a framework cutting across all the divergent opinions that we have in the world today needs to evolve. A consensus needs to evolve in the interest of human rights and right to life of people who are not involved in conflicts. Okay, so it is a very important point that since the industry is set to grow, we must set our hearts to evolve that consensus as soon as possible. That's all I have to say. Thank you. Yes, sir.
I am Colonel Nikhil Srivastav and I have a question. So, can you hear me?
Yes, we
Yes,
can.
sir.
Okay. My question is firstly that is there a provision for a private military in India? First question is that. And I can understand that there are PASARA licensed security agencies who can be used as private military at some point of time. But is there a definitive methodology or provision for a private to set up private military in India?
So currently, there is a difference between the companies that are operational in security space. One is that provides military services that are more overt in nature, and then there is a security aspect to it. So in India, mostly security companies are present, and they may not be as uh, complex in scope as the ones that we see evolving in Western countries. For example, it also depends on access to weapons as well, because in India we don't have access to weapons. So the military is out of the question because only security aspect is seen by companies here in India. So currently, there is no framework because there is not a no possibility of a PMSC being evolved as complex as those prevalent in Western countries.
Yeah, see, the security agencies which are operating in India under the PASARA license even don't have the mandate to carry firearms. They're not supposed to carry firearms. For even to carry firearms, they'll have to take special permission, even if they have got the PASARA license or other permits. So that is one. So my second question is when you're talking about like you see the case of Blackwater, which is one of the most famous or infamous, whatever way you take it, companies, private militaries in the world. Uh, they were getting their weapons from the American military itself. I mean, most of the Americans were being purchased or taken on lease from the American military itself. And they were initially taken not as a private military, but as a security. They were supposed they were operating under the cover of providing security. So that is where the dichotomy lies. When you're talking about the private military security company being used as a private military. So that is where my question is that how does that dichotomy happen?
Actually, Indian veterans, they do are employed by PMCs outside India. In Qatar, they are recently there was an incident in Middle East where some of the contractors, I don't remember exactly, but they were from, I think, Navy, and they were there on a training mission. So they do consultancy work, but the direct and overt nature that hasn't been seen yet, where Indians are involved, particularly Indians. So uh, they might go and work at foreign PMSCs, but there aren't any PMSCs that are hosted in India currently. There is also an aspect of incentive because veterans in India don't have that incentive to go and work and risk their life afterwards. So that's also there because they've primarily in USA pensions and pension and benefits aren't that extensive as in India. So they might go work there for monetary benefit, but that is not the case in India. So Indian veterans aren't that inclined to work there. They may work as consultancy or advisory role, but I haven't seen yet Indian veterans going outside and being offered overt roles. So yeah.
Aman, if you allow me, I would like to
Just
add to your comment. Just a moment, Mr. Nikhil. Aman, basically, you have brought out a very valid point as far as the Indian veterans are concerned. First of all, we have to give the credit to the training systems of our armed forces, wherein the ethics and the values are embedded as an inherent part of our training. So, a value of the human life, respect to the flag of whichever country we may be operating in, are the ethos of our military personnel. So, keeping that in mind, whether it is a soldier whose pension is meager or an officer whose pension may be a little more than that, possibility of Indian Armed Forces personnel thinking of operating as a private military contractor, especially getting into the military warfare, are as of now at least remote. And the credit goes to the training, as I said. So your point is very valid. And we have restricted ourselves in India and by regulations also to the security services which are being provided to various sectors, including the some of the cantonments. And those services are also regulated by the absolutely regulatory norms from the law also. So therefore, in India at least, there is a proper framework. Uh, and that's what I would like to say in the support of your point. And if you allow me, I would like to ask you one question because I am myself a bit confused about it.
Sure, sir, sure.
If the countries who are powerful like USA, Russia, and other Westerners are the ones who promote the corporate companies who provide private military services, and by default, if the UN also in consonance in using the services, which will be the country which can take an initiative in framing the regulatory laws for such a utilization is one question. And secondly, with the ethos for India which are spelled out, what do you think will be the role for India in taking the initiative in framing such regulatory procedures? Thank you.
Sir, so for the first question, uh, currently there is a demand for such services. So banning them would only lead to proliferation of illegal market for such services. So regulation is always better than banning. So first is this. Then in case of India, we actually, so first we would be we would need to be a significant player in the market for to be able uh, to be able I don't remember the exact word, to chime in for and be a significant stakeholder. So currently there are big companies, and as sir also mentioned, there is the net worth of the market, and India is a very meager player in that market. So until and unless we aren't a significant one, I don't think India would play a major role in setting the frameworks, and those frameworks would be adopted at an international level. That's my take on that.
Thank you.
I have a comment to supplement what Comrade Deshmukh has said, and probably in part answering what Nikhil Srivastava had asked. So the primary countries, the lead countries in the Western world, if we take, starting with USA, Russia also included, UK, France, everybody included, their militaries essentially operate in an expeditionary mode. They operate all over the world. In India, we don't operate in expeditionary mode. We only operate within our borders or on our borders, and if necessary, in terms of war, we cross the borders. The only place where the Indian militaries operate outside, or therefore there is a need for even supporting contractors from India to operate outside, is UN peacekeeping missions. That's all. Other than UN peacekeeping mission, we do not operate in any other mode outside this country. So, with reference to the dichotomy that Nikhil Srivastava was trying to, ask, we must understand the method of operation. They are essentially expeditionary. We are essentially defensive. The only place where we cross is UN peacekeeping mission. That's all. And when we cross when we go for UN peacekeeping missions also, if we need private military contractors, I'm sure the Army Service Corps, for example, ASC, requisitions its ration pani from private military, private contractors. So to that extent, they are serving the military, but they don't supply weapons. They don't stand guard with weapons on the supply route. They don't protect the convoys carrying rations. Okay, it is the army which does it. Okay, so our essential method of operation, expeditionary mode and so-called defensive mode, are the reasons why there is a dichotomy of this thing in our context, at least in the Indian context. Now coming to, in part again trying to answer rather, what Deshmukh sir asked, which country should take the lead? Which countries took the lead for Geneva Conventions? The same countries which indulged in the war in Solferino or thereafter. Which countries initiated the Nuremberg trials, which became the starting point of international humanitarian law? Which countries conducted the International Criminal Court to be convened in Geneva and trying all these people, tin pot dictators in Africa and South America, bringing them to justice for violation of gross human rights? Same countries. Okay, if we employ, and I'm very happy to see that the question is, of course, Deshmukh sir, is a very pointed question. So I am feeling provoked actually. Okay, there are n number of studies. I just now mentioned, I have some text of some of the studies with me in some other folders also. Okay, Brown University, for example, and various other universities in United States are at the forefront of researching into this. Okay, only with the purpose of bringing objectivity, transparency, and accountability in the operation of private military contractors, because they are making profits, all right, but everyone knows what is right and what is wrong. If you kill an innocent, it is wrong. We don't need a law for this. The whole of humanity agrees on this point. Therefore, there is a conscious effort in the Western world itself, which is primarily employing private military contractors for conflict purposes, Okay, there is a this thing, and that lead should now become more. It should gather pace. Okay, because we are reaching a point where we are not only seeing profits, but we are also seeing tremendous scope for violations. Okay. So from that point of view, my short answer to Deshmukh sir would be the same countries which are employing must. Otherwise, the same phenomena will happen what has happened in Afghanistan. Okay. Taliban was created to fight the Soviets. When the Soviets went back, what happened? The Taliban became the target. Who created, for what purposes, and if it is not regulated and controlled, will become exactly the same way the story of war on terror went. So that is where our moral responsibility as an international community comes in. Yes, sir. Thank you.
I have one observation, and that is that when you are, say, in a complex situation where you cannot discern between the terrorist and the civilian, which is a dilemma which we faced in Kashmir when we were operating there in the 90s. Uh, and that is the point of time. How do you discern between an innocent civilian and a terrorist in the guise of an innocent civilian? That is where the private military will lose its. I mean, the armed forces are under the control of the state. They have certain guidelines, certain directions under which they follow. But the private military may not adhere to those. So how do you tackle that?
That's a very good question, and that is precisely why we are having this paper presentation. In order to bring in that consciousness that there has to be responsibility and accountability pinned on whomsoever registers such a company, whomsoever contracts them and employs them, and justice for whomsoever suffers. Okay, that is precisely the purpose of this paper presentation, because what you said in the in the militaries, okay, I'm sure all of us are aware that there is a principle of proportionality. The Geneva law says that if a military commander has reasons to believe that the target is primarily civilian, even if the target is important, he should not attack. He should defer his attack so that the civilian population and others can at least escape from the hostilities. So the principle of proportionality is every time pinned onto the military commanders. We are of the same opinion that the same principle of proportionality should be pinned on private military contractors also. After all, they are corporations making money. They are not illegal entities. They are registered entities. Like DynCorp is a registered entity. Blackwater is a registered entity. Okay, they should be held accountable. That is the whole purpose of this deliberation. Thank you for asking that question. Nice question. Yeah. Yes, Colonel Sharma.
Yeah, we all understand that these organizations, the reason why they come up, why they have been raised, is to reduce the load of the countries. Even when you look at United Nations, you'll find certain developed countries do not participate with soldiers in United Nations. It's only India, Pakistan, Zimbabwe, Bangladesh who participate with soldiers in United Nations. So it is their alternative they have made, and there is a definite requirement for regulating these private military companies. And it is good that we are doing this debate, and it is we who need to raise this voice before the corporations in US and other countries take on and misuse them the way they are being used in Ukraine.
Thank you. That's right. Fully endorse. If Chitali, if there are no other questions, you can proceed.
Sure, sir. Thank you all for your questions and comments. May I now request Commander J.K. Nair to share his views?
Thank you, Chitali. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Let me first congratulate the mentors first Dr. Srinivasan, Commodore Deshmukh, and Professor Dua for this wonderful initiative. I also appreciate Mr. Aman for selecting this very interesting topic. He has put in excellent effort. Cost cutting is happening everywhere, and the armed forces are of no exception. In fact, the Americans have mastered this art, and they successfully tried it at many places in Gulf and later in Afghanistan. And it may be happening in Ukraine, Russia also. I'm sure the days are not far where the wealthier nations may get into subcontract the entire security to agencies or nations who can do the job. The implementation of the concept discussed today is challenging, and nations needs to adopt a calibrated approach for the implementation of subcontracting in the area of defense and security. May I thank Mr. Aman for this wonderful session and the recommendations being rendered. I wish him all the best. God bless you. On behalf of Defense Research and Studies, may I also take this opportunity to thank all the dignitaries who are present here today, including Colonel Arun and Colonel Nikhil. Thank you very much. God bless you all.
Chitali, you have to unmute.
Thank you, sir. May I now request Commodore Deshmukh, Nav Sena Medal, retired, to share his mentor's perspective.
Thank you, Chitali. Dr. Srinivasan, I just wanted to point out two of my esteemed colleagues from Russia have joined this presentation, Mr. Mahesh Daswal and Dr. Rameshwar Dayal.
Welcome, sir.
Thank you so very much, colleagues, for your kind motivation to the mentees we are having here. They joined from Russia, specifically on our invite. Thank you so much. At the outset, I would like to compliment Dras and Pragna for taking this initiative of mentoring the researchers, because that is one area which I personally feel as country as a whole we are lacking. It seems that we are heading towards quantity rather than the quality of the research, which is need of the day to day. And Dras and Pragna, recognizing this particular aspect, brought in this field into it and decided that we should take an initiative to mentor the students doing quality research and writing the various articles on the various topics. And the results are for all of us to see. So I must thank Commander Nair and Dr. Srinivasan for taking this initiative. And it's my personal honor that they have found me good enough to be contributing somewhat to that effort. Secondly, I must also compliment that the students who are joining us, the mentees who are here, are not afraid of choosing the topics which are beyond the normal run-of-the-mill topics. The topic which Aman chose is a unique topic which has got a severe implications as we will walk forward. And he has been able to do an appropriate study, compile the correct case studies which are in support of the argument which he put forward, and he has been able to bring the pros and cons of both, and going forward what would be the need for framing the regulations and the laws which will bring the culprits to the book is absolutely essential. I must compliment the presentation which he compiled. It was extremely good to watch his slides, and the correlation between the slides and the points which are presenting, it was excellent. It was captivating for the audience. My compliments to you, Aman, and it is a lesson to other mentees how the presentation should be. As far as the role of the mentors in this particular presentation is concerned, the topic was as new to us also in somewhat manner as it was for Aman. So supporting the research what we was doing, we also learned a lot in that. So it was a give and take, rather learning from each other. And that is what I think is strengthening this particular platform, wherein this give and take is taking us forward in a better way. Before I close, I would like to compliment Colonel Sharma for a most valid point we brought in. Aman, that was the point which I wanted to ask you, and I wanted you to come out with that particular answer. Today, a scenario where China or Pakistan will not employ a private military contractor to fight against India, or any of the countries who is familiar and friendly with these two countries will not provide them with the private military contractors, is in the realm of feasibility. So it is essential for India to be aware that we could be victim of private military contractors tomorrow, like we are victims of terrorism today. So we cannot leave this aside, that we will get prepared only when the time comes for it. Time is now. We are a respected member of the United Security Council. We are also now have the presidentship of G20. We are generally respected by most of the countries as a peace living country who are not invading others to capture a territory. So we really hold a unique capability, as Colonel Sharma brought out, to put across a need to various countries who are allowing these private military contractors to come up, that there is a need to have a stringent regulations, not only to avoid the human rights violations, but as you yourself put it very rightly, if tomorrow these companies go berserk, the countries who have created them will be in trouble tomorrow. So this is how the argument will have to be put forward by India. And I think India is a nation which holds a credibility to put this point across to the world. Last but not the least, we have to understand and appreciate, as you put it rightly, the mercenaries and the private military contractors are for here to stay. There is absolutely no doubt. What we are seeing today in Bosnia, in other countries, including Afghanistan, it's an indicator which way the world is going. Therefore, time is now for all of us to be very concise about it. And I would recommend that a further research needs to be done by someone in Ras and Pragna, what actually should be the lawful framework to control these companies. You have already laid a very solid foundation. Building on this, finding the gaps, the research could bring in what could be the most collaborative and the effective measures to control this particular private military contractors. I hope somebody of our students will take up these research in forthcoming, and we as mentors will be more than happy to contribute toward the success of our students. So once again, Aman, my compliments to you, and thanks to Dras Pragna for encouraging students to take on such a wonderful research. It's an honor to be associated. God bless all of us. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah, Mr. Daswal had something to say, I believe so. Daswal, sir?
Yes, you want to say something?
Please go ahead, sir.
All right, okay.
Hello. Hello.
Yes, sir, we can hear you, sir.
I just wrote my remark already, and in brief, I'm very thankful to Commodore Deshmukh, who has been very kind, and I find these presentations of very high quality, very innovative, and the way you are mentoring them, you are motivating them, and you are encouraging the young generation. It's more than duty you are doing as elders, and taking the younger generation to put up their views and research with the authentic concerns for the country. My only suggestion is that apart from the persons involved, we should also invite some authorities in power who could understand the themes and some effective results in real time could be obtained in near future. Thank you, and I would look forward to always attending any events and any presentations in future. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. Thank you. Chitali, you might ask Silvana whether she wants to share some views. Silvana, are you online?
Mhm.
Silvana, are you online?
She's there, sir, but I think she's muted herself.
All right. Okay, go ahead.
Thank you, Deshmukh sir. Now I would request Ashok Dua sir to share his mentor's perspective. Dua sir, can you hear us? Yes, he's
Yes,
there.
I can hear you. I would like to say that Aman's presentation was very good. And as my colleagues, Commodore Deshmukh, Commander JK, Group Captain Srinivasan, and the guests like Colonel Arun Sharma, Colonel Nikhil Srivastava, and Daswal Saab brought out that there is a need to develop, to have more research studies in this particular area because PMSCs are here to stay. Whether we have it in India or not, it's unlikely that we will ever have PMSC, but that doesn't mean that we should not go deeper into it. We need to go deeper into it. We need to understand the various ramifications of these PMSCs, and we need to, research will help us to take right decision when the time comes. Thank you so much. Very good presentation, Aman. Appreciate.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir. Now we'll end the program with a short thank you note by Alex. Could you please go ahead? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Chitalu. So, ladies and gentlemen, it is now my privilege to share a small token of appreciation for your presence and participation in this program. We hope that opportunities like this for emerging scholars and students will contribute to their personal development as well as advancement of knowledge. I'm especially grateful to Dr. Srinivasan, Commander J.K. Nair, Commodore S.L. Deshmukh, and Dr. Ashok Dua for mentoring and guiding all of us in this program. I'm also thankful to all our distinguished guests and audience for their enthusiastic participation. Thank you and have a pleasant evening. Jai Hind.
Thank you.
Thank you.